Welcome everybody to this interview session about transferable skills, where we're going to talk about communication and why it's worth consider hiring pilots for your business to help you improving on your communication. And thinking about it, actually there was a survey done for about 400, I think it was about 400 companies, and with over 100,000 employees. And the result of the survey was that this miscommunication costs the company $62.4 million alone. So it's really worth looking at the topic of communication. And today with us again, Arpad Szakal, our expert on transferable skills. He will be hosting the session. And Paul Green, who is a former pilot who started his own business, where he's actually teaching organizations how to apply cockpit methods in their business to improve on decision-making, efficiency, communications, amongst others. Welcome everybody, and I hand over the controls to Arpad to guide us along through the session.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for the introduction. So in this episode or session, we're going to be talking about the importance of clear, concise, and precise communication in the cockpit. I mean, it's a matter of life or death, as we know. But it would be really good, Paul, if you could give us an insight why or what is the benefit of gaining insights from all team members, from all parties or stakeholders, and how can this involving everyone, respecting other people's opinion in your team, can benefit organizations outside of the aviation, strictly aviation sort of setting or industry?
Yeah, thanks for having me back firstly. Yeah, so I think in aviation, we're trained to collect information from everywhere. As a pilot sitting at the front, there's an awful lot of an airplane that you can't actually see yourself and that you're not aware of. Although our systems are very sophisticated and we can gain a lot of information, sometimes our eyes are the cabin crew. So really utilizing that element of the team, being able to call up your cabin crew and say, I've just seen this particular thing, or we've got this indication, are you seeing anything in the back, is always a vital tool. Similarly, on the ground, air traffic control have a really good viewpoint. So if we're ever experiencing anything when we're on the ground, they're always a great form of reference. So you just never know who else can help you, and it's always worth kind of taking in that information. And I would say exactly the same to businesses. One of the things I talk about in the cockpit method is the idea of closing the loop. So everything that we do, every decision that we try to make, every form of communication we do is one big loop. And until we've well and truly completed the task at hand, until we've communicated with everybody that we need to communicate, that loop is not fully closed.
Yeah, Martin, would you like to add anything to this particular point or section?
Yeah, it's actually, of course, aviation, we like to we like to use acronyms. For example, when we talk with the cabin crew in case of an emergency, we have this very famous NITS briefing, and it's a nature, the intention, the time available, and special instructions. For example, now a cabin crew sees something in the back of the airplane, let's say a fire in one of the overhead bins. And then, because we don't have a direct indication, or before we get the indication in the cockpit, it might take some time. So then the information will be communicated forward without seeing each other first over this interphone. And then the pilots will make a decision and go through the decision-making process to go where they want to go, what's the best option. And then they will communicate back the nature, the intention, the time available, and any special instructions. And this way, and the cabin crew will repeat that back, everything, even verbally. And in some companies, it depends. This has to be done actually, that the lead cabin crew will come into the cockpit. So then you do it eye to eye, but it depends if you have smoke in the cabin or not. So just consider this in your business, where you have a special situation or even a normal business evolving situation or scenario. How do you communicate that? How do you integrate other team members? Do you actually have a process for that? Or is it just because of your experience as a manager, you just go and free flow it? And that would be very interesting to ask yourself the question, do we have this established process for that in our company? And if not, how should that look like? So we might be able to use some of these closed loop communications to really make sure the other person understood it the same way the communicator transmitted it.
Some of the business owners that I've spoken to have, when we talk about the NITS brief, they think that that's a great way to talk to shareholders, because it just gets through the information that they need in such a short, sharp, concise way. And it's invaluable, really.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. According to data, a lot of data actually, the lack of communication skills among individuals involved in air operations contribute to the vast majority of accidents and incidents in aviation. Paul, what role does clear, concise, and again precise communication play in the cockpit?
It's absolutely vital, and what's important with our communication is that we learn from past mistakes. An example that I like to use is the Kegworth disaster, where a British Midland 737 crashed onto the M1. And the reason for that was they had a problem with their left engine, and the captain, wanting to gather information from all sources, asked the cabin crew to go and have a look at the left engine. Now, if you imagine, as pilots, we're looking forward, so our left is to our left. A cabin crew who's then walking down towards the back of the aircraft, facing the rear of the aircraft, her left is a completely different side of the aeroplane. So when she comes back up to the cockpit, she says to the pilots, actually, there was a problem with your right engine, which ultimately led to the pilot shutting down the wrong engine. As they come into land, having shut down their good engine, they throw more fuel into an engine that's got a problem, and it was catastrophic. So that led to a whole change in the way we work. We no longer refer to left and right engines, we refer to engine number 1 and engine number 2. So I think that's key to this. Although we do make mistakes, having that review element running through how we work in aviation, being able to adapt and change the way we're working based on what's happening around us is vital, and communication plays a massive part of that.
Martin, there is a term called Cockpit Gradient that is used within the context of aviation and piloting. Could you define that term and explain the audience why is it important and why it's relevant?
Yeah, the Cockpit Gradient, it's actually, you can also apply, let's call it a hierarchy gradient. Imagine the captain would be the god and the first officer is just a servant. And that's a big problem, because if the servant would see an issue and try to communicate it upwards to the god, to the captain, and the captain doesn't see it that way and he would just carry on anyway, vital safety relevant information might be missed. So it's very important to have this level, but not for all times. And for example, if you're higher up, let's say in cruising altitude, or where you have more time available, the information needs to flow across the gradient. It doesn't matter who's right, but what's right. So the first officer can always say things like, the captain can always say things to the first officer about the situation, for example. And looking at this Kegworth disaster, let's imagine now the wrong information comes from the cabin. And the captain goes, oh, all right, so I have to shut down this engine. But now the first officer will come back to the review element, actually looks at the engine instruments, and to confirm the issue, it's like, actually, captain, look, actually, on the indication, it doesn't show that. It's, according to our indication, should be the other engine. So now, if the gradient is good, the captain will take that into account. That, okay, so we have to review and go back and check, is it really the right engine we're shutting down here? If the gradient would be too high, the captain goes like, no, it's all right, the cabin crew, he's taking the decision without integrating that. This accident has also brought in new communication. Now we call it engine number 1 and number 2, but at the same time, before shutting down any critical elements of the system where you don't have, or where you might lose redundancy, both pilots have to confirm that it is the right engine, or the right, you see, already in the wording, the correct system that you're shutting down. And that's when it comes to cockpit gradient. And especially the gradient changes when you, for example, when you come below 1,000 feet and it's time critical, the whole communication will change to a more military style. So then the captain has final authority, which he has all the time, but there it will normally, you will see more orders flying across the flight deck, and they will be executed. And the moment you have time, then it's again more a flat gradient. Paul, do you have anything about that?
Yeah, I was just about to say your slip made a very good point, that we don't use terminology like right or wrong, because right can be misconstrued as right hand. So we use correct, incorrect, affirmative, negative. All the language that we use in aviation very much stops any ambiguity, so that everything we say can only be taken one way.
Yeah, no, that's great. So what can businesses learn from the way communication is approached in the cockpit? Maybe Paul, if you would like to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm talking to my clients about at the moment is businesses have a big push whenever they do communication training, where they talk about the verbal and non-verbal communication skills. And absolutely non-verbal communication skills are incredibly important. We can learn a lot from them. But we now live in a world of virtual businesses. You know, we do a lot of our communication through Zoom, over email, over phone calls, or people are in lockdown and people are staying at home. And a couple of the big businesses I've spoken to recently said they have no intention of returning back to office life anytime soon. In the cockpit, we are used to relying on verbal communication. You know, 90% of the time when I'm flying along, I'm looking forwards. I'm not looking at the person sitting next to me. I'm talking to air traffic control over a radio. I'm talking to the cabin crew through a door. We talk to ground crew in the same way. You can't really see them. So as pilots, we massively rely on those verbal communication skills, which businesses are now starting to realize are incredibly important. They've invested a lot of time in the non-verbal side of things, but any pilot coming into your business is going to bring these verbal communication skills in abundance.
Martin, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, this is really important when it comes to also managing upwards. Because, for example, when it comes to communication, maybe let's say the top management team of your business, they're working on a strategy, they're working on decisions they're going to take. But have you gathered the information from everybody, also from people who are maybe closer to the show, maybe closer to the operations of things? Have you invited their information? And is there actually a pathway for them to, let's say, manage upwards, so that people can really contribute to your decision-making process? And is this invited, instead of you're taking a decision at the top level or medium level management without knowing that maybe the other engine is on fire, engine number 2 is on fire instead of engine number 1, and you're working all of that just because somebody else might have the information, but it needs to be invited. I'd like to make this example, like the CEO has to take a decision, and maybe his personal assistant has the information available, but she's not going to share it with him because he was harsh in the morning to her and basically shut her off. So she's not going to say anything to him about it, and he's going to carry on his day taking decisions. You never know who might have the missing puzzle piece of information that's going to help you to make the best decisions.
Yeah. No, that's great, and hopefully it was useful to really businesses outside of the industry to understand how communication, clear, concise, precise communication that is really inherent to being a pilot will be beneficial to their day-to-day and their business.